This book was never meant for the masses. Written over 700 years ago, it reveals the hidden structure behind all energy and creation. In this video, you'll learn how to manipulate energy using Ramon Llull's forgotten system, a framework of divine principles, willpower, and spiritual mechanics that shape your reality. No fluff, just the ancient code behind transformation. You've likely felt it in the quiet moments between thoughts, in the symmetry of leaves, in the way certain things arrive at just the right time, too precise to be chance. You were right to wonder, because this world is not noise. It is not scattered or hollow. It is a script, not one written in ink or carved in stone, but a living architecture threaded through matter itself. Ramon Llull saw it clearly, not as metaphor, not as theory, but as a structure, a breathing language that shaped stars, trees, and breath alike. The universe, he believed, is not accidental. It is patterned. It is reflective. It is holy. Try to remember what it feels like to look at something ordinary and feel something extraordinary pulse behind it. A stone that feels heavier than it should, a glance that carries weight. These are not illusions. They are signals. Llull believed every created thing is a mirror of a higher perfection, not in a vague, symbolic way, but directly. Matter is meaningful. Physicality is not a distraction from divinity. It is its trace. Each thing points, each shape signifies. Reality is not mute. It speaks constantly, quietly. To understand Llull, you must step into a different logic, one where divinity is not far but embedded. Think of how light falls through stained glass. That's how he saw the world. The divine filtered through levels, structured, layered, ordered. He stood inside the Neoplatonic current that flowed from Plotinus and passed through the Christian mystics. The world was not a flat surface for him. It was depth, rising from the visible toward the invisible. The One, like a source of light behind all form, shines through layers of being, like the stars arranged in a sky that is not just astronomical, but angelic. Llull did not look up and see planets as random bodies hurling themselves through space. He saw choreography. He saw the heavens arranged as a vast, turning manuscript, lawful, radiant. Each orbit a whisper of divine mind. The old astrologers had it partly right, but Llull went deeper. He did not look for prediction. He looked for reflection. The stars were not tools. They were sentences. He read them not to tell the future, but to recognize the present. You've probably sensed it, that order beneath the mess, that feeling that things fit together even when they pretend not to. Llull trusted that instinct. He called it divine code. And just as Plato once said God geometrizes, and later Gauss whispered that God arithmetizes, Llull believed the structure of reality is not poetic suggestion. It is literal. Mathematics is not human invention. It is divine echo. The lines, angles, numbers, they do not simply measure, they reveal. And at the center of it all, Llull placed the dignities, not traits, not concepts, but living forces, unity, infinity, wisdom, mercy, goodness. These are not names, they are presences. They move through everything that exists, not metaphorically, but functionally. They are not distant, they are encoded, like software humming silently beneath a machine's surface. The dignities run the universe, not just as ideals, but as real intelligences. You were right to feel like something is holding the world together. It is. These dignities are the substance of meaning. They are the logic behind beauty, the reason music moves you, the way mercy shows up in unexpected places. They are not called forth. They are always already here. And Llull, more than most, tried to show how they interlock how they generate motion, how they sustain form. To him, existence was not the accidental gathering of matter. It was the necessary unfolding of divine presence, patterned with precision. Creation is not a warehouse of objects. It is a lattice of signals, a network of signs. Every rock, every wind, every sorrow, all of it is saturated with direction. This was not faith for Llull. This was design. He did not pray to escape the world. He studied it to decode the sacred mechanics within it. You may have felt it, that something is being said constantly in the patterns of your life, that something intelligent hides behind the repetition. You are right. It is not silence you hear, it is structure. And this structure climbs, it breathes, it circles back in the firmament above and the mineral below, in the orbits and the organs, in the leaf and the law. This is not symbolic thinking. This is mechanical spirituality. Llull did not guess. He mapped. He built diagrams, circles, moving systems. He built them not to impress, but to remember, because this world was never a blank page. It was always a coded manuscript, waiting to be read by someone who finally understood that reality does not speak in words, it speaks in structure. And so, as you begin to listen again, not just with your ears, but with attention, with breath, you may start to feel it, the rhythm beneath coincidence, the cadence beneath emotion. What seemed like separate events will start to line up, not like a story, like a system, like software. You were right to feel like there was more. There is. There always has been. And Llull's gift was never in inventing it. It was in remembering what had already been written. Not once, not twice, but in everything. You've likely felt the shape of it, though you may not have had the name. A sense of rising. A quiet ascent stitched into the structure of the world. Not metaphor, not philosophy. A real ladder. Not one built of wood or stone, but of essences of fire, water, air, and earth, followed by the green pulse of plants, the awakened breath of animals, the firelit gaze of humans, the radiant presence of angels, and beyond them, what cannot be named, only approached. This is the chain Llull walked. He did not imagine it. He studied it. He saw that each layer carried more of the divine, not because the layers below were false, but because the higher contained more light, more pattern, more will. Try to remember that moment when you stood between things, not quite of earth, not quite of spirit, that strange weight of being in two worlds at once. You weren't imagining it, you were built for it. In Llull's vision, the human is not at the center, out of pride, but out of function. You are the hinge, the threshold, the place where dust and eternity meet. You walk on soil and yet dream in symbols. You feel hunger and yet long for purity. That paradox is not an error, it is the sign. Even the lowest layer is not mute. Earth is not just substance. Fire is not just heat. These are not particles. They are presences. They carry intent. Llull saw it not as dead matter, but as sacred mechanics. Things move because they mean. Rocks fall because they remember gravity. Wind moves because it is tuned to breath. There is no emptiness here. No chaos. Only design, dense and radiant. Perhaps you've noticed that the shapes which most deeply move you are not invented. They return, they repeat. The spiral of a shell, the branching of trees, the proportions of the human face. These are not accidents, they are signatures. Sacred geometry is not an aesthetic, it is a memory. It is the silent mathematics behind all presence. Llull was not alone in this knowing. Others had felt it. Kepler would later hear it in the song of planets. The ancients saw it in the music of spheres. Llull read it in the logic of diagrams. He drew circles, always circles, concentric and layered, interlocked and turning, not art, instruction. These were not illustrations, they were structures, attempts to represent a world that is already turning, already proportioned, already true. When you look at one of his wheels, you are not seeing his thoughts, you are seeing a mirror of the machine, the one that moves the heavens and names the stars. Think of the architecture that makes you pause, cathedrals rising like frozen prayers, crop circles pressed into fields with quiet force, crystals forming with impossible symmetry. These are echoes of the same grammar. Form does not come from nowhere, it is pulled from the same well. Llull touched it with ink, others with stone, others with breath, but it is always the same well. He was not isolated. His mind moved through many rivers. He had seen the diagrams of the mystics in Islam. He knew the logic patterns of Neoplatonism. He understood the secret paths of the Christian Kabbalists. They were all drawing from a shared current, each of them trying to speak the language that forms the world before words. And in this, Llull encountered the Zaija, a wheel, a device used in Arabic, thought to compute possibilities, not numbers, paths, not randomness, patterned choice. It would become the seed of his own system. His logic wheels carry the divine names, not as titles, as active forces, like the Sephirot of Kabbalah. They are not qualities, they are emanations, movements of divine energy. They do not simply describe God, they unfold God, turn the wheel, and the names combine. Unity with goodness, mercy with justice, and something new appears, not random, not guessed, generated, calculated. This was his great art, ars magna, not a book, a mechanism, a living engine made to rotate the principles of divinity into patterns we could read. Perhaps you've sensed this, that truth is not just found, it is built, that clarity comes not as a lightning strike, but as a rotation, a turning, a combination. Llull believed you could turn these principles like gears, and when they clicked into place, insight would arise, as if you had been handed the key to a lock that had always been there. You were right to feel like understanding is something you fall into when the pattern is right. That's what he built. A way to turn the pattern until it opens. He worked in triplets, always triplets. Agent, patient, act, beginning, middle, end, matter, form, composite. These are not just structures, they are reflections of the Trinity, of the way things move, of how things become. It is the grammar of becoming itself, not religious rhetoric, structural reality. So when you look at a tree, do not just see growth, see recursion. See that every branch remembers the root. When you hear a bell, feel how it vibrates space into sound. When you step beneath a rose window, know you are standing inside a map. These are not decorations, they are diagrams. The divine is not hiding, it is embedded. And Llull believed it could be read, not symbolically, mechanically, like code, like music, like fire. Pattern vibration that moves meaning through form. That is the secret you've always known. That things are connected not just emotionally, but structurally. That behind each form is function. Behind each function is principle. Behind each principle is presence. The ladder stands. The wheel turns. And now you have seen its outline. The next step is not understanding. It is activation. You've likely seen circles drawn with more care than reason could explain. You've likely touched paper and felt it carry more than texture. You were right to feel it, because somewhere, not far from silence, Ramon Llull built a machine of prayer and logic, not built of gears or wires, but of ideas that move when turned. The Ars Magna, the great art, not metaphor, a mechanism, a divine engine, designed not to impress, but to reveal, not to decorate, but to decode. It was never theory to him. It was interface, a way to enter the logic that shaped the world before the world was born. He made it from wheels, simple ones, paper cut into rings that turned against one another, marked with names not chosen at random, but given 9 of them on the main wheel. Goodness, greatness, duration, power, wisdom, will, virtue, truth, glory. These were not just ideals, not just attributes. They were active forces, archetypes, each a pillar, each a current, each turning within the others like music shaped into symbol. Llull believed these dignities were the spine of all structure. When they aligned, they did not suggest, they formed. He saw what many overlooked, that divinity does not descend from above like a distant light, but unfolds in pattern. That if you want to understand how the world works, you do not begin with belief. You begin with structure, with combinations. And so the wheels were made to turn, each rotation offering a pairing or triplet of divine names, not to amuse, not to distract, to test, to reveal, to answer questions not with guesses, but with form. What happens when power meets wisdom? What flows from goodness aligned with will? These are not just thoughts, they are coded interactions. Try to remember a time when a certain combination of energies just made sense, when a decision felt right, not because it was easy, but because it carried balance. That is what the wheels reflect, not randomness, possibility, a map of how the divine moves through cause and purpose. Each turn of the wheel is a new sentence written in the alphabet of essence. Llull's figures look cryptic at first, strings of letters, combinations like TY, AA, EAY, IAZ. But these are not gibberish, they are compressed insight. Each figure holds position. TY might stand for truth and glory. AA might repeat goodness and goodness again, emphasizing it. EY might combine duration, will, and wisdom. Each one is a sentence spoken in divine code. When he asked whether God could alter the purpose of creation, he did not write a paragraph. He spun the wheels. He examined the result. He read what the system returned, not opinion, output. This is where the machine reveals its true shape. Not mechanical in the cold sense, mechanical in the sacred sense. Predictable, not in content, but in form. It does not tell the future. It tells the logic that makes futures possible. Llull believed that questions about morality, fate, theology could be approached like any system, through interaction, through rotation, through testing the balance of the dignities in motion. He was not reducing faith. He was activating it, because faith without form collapses, and form without spirit dries. The Ars Magna was his middle path, a sacred structure for spiritual reasoning. You are right to feel that some answers cannot be spoken, but must be shown. The wheel does not explain, it expresses. It holds the logic of divine interaction in motion. This was never idle thought. Llull saw the world as a machine powered by divine names, not metaphorically, literally. Behind every event, every decision, every breath, he saw combinations, the same combinations his wheels explored. This is why he built them, not to predict, not to preach, but to enter, to offer a way back into the architecture of purpose. Try to feel what it means to ask a question, not to a person, but to a pattern. To turn a wheel and not hear an answer, but receive a structure. That was his method. Not superstition, not fantasy. Structured mysticism, logical devotion. He called it the great art, because it was not his. It was what had always been moving beneath things. He just built a way to interact with it, to receive its language, to be shaped by its responses. When you rotate the wheel, you are not making something new. You are discovering a path that was already there. The figures returned are not formulas, they are configurations, each one a pattern of divine law in contact with the present. This is not how to guess, this is how to see, how to listen differently, how to let structure become answer. Llull did not believe that the sacred had to remain inaccessible. He believed it had a system, that creation was not chaos filtered into order, but law shaped into life. And he handed us the interface. The divine does not hide, it turns. And now you've seen the outline. What follows is not just more understanding. It is learning how to move inside the system itself, how to speak its language, how to combine intention with code and call it reality. You've likely felt both forces at once, that quiet pull in your life that seems already written, and the open space where your next step feels yours alone to shape. You were right to sense that paradox. You were not imagining that both were true. Fate and freedom are not opposites. They are intertwined scripts in the same unfolding design. Llull saw this not as contradiction, but as code, a structure of divine law with moving parts you are part of. He did not see fate as a chain wrapped tight around time. He saw it as a patterned field, structured but flexible, like a song that leaves space for the singer to choose how to carry each note. In this structure, divine power exists. It must. A universe held together by will without collapse must rest on something stronger than accident. But power alone would mean predestination, and that would dissolve the dignity of choice. So beside power, there must be justice. And justice does not allow for forced endings. It requires that humans choose between shadow and light, that they be free to err, free to turn back, free to shape the shape that shapes them. This is why Voluntas will is the hinge, not a gatekeeper, a fulcrum, a place where divine order and human action meet, not as argument, but as code. The wheel turns, and will is what receives it. It does not command, it responds. When goodness rotates into wisdom and then meets power, something happens, not just in heaven, but in you. The combinations on the wheel do not exist apart from the one who turns them. They activate through alignment. Perhaps you've noticed that certain energies in your life arrive together, that moments of clarity often ride beside humility, that true strength always seems braided with discernment. These are not moods, they are combinations, spiritual pairings. Llull understood this with precision. He saw that when two or three dignities align, they do not remain concepts, they become active dynamics. Power joined with wisdom becomes enlightened authority. Justice met with love becomes compassion shaped into structure. These are not hypotheticals, they are spiritual outcomes. And the wheels were not meant to predict them, they were built to help you participate in them. Every interaction you have, every moment you stand between one choice and another is not small, it is structural. Llull believed that you do not move through a blank field, but through a patterned one, like stepping into a web where every thread holds its own logic. The combinations of divine attributes are not distant ideals. They are energetic codes that surround every possibility in your day. When you feel torn between honesty and comfort, between action and patience, what you are really facing is not confusion. You are standing inside the intersection of dignities. You are experiencing what it feels like when multiple forces of creation meet inside you. This is where freedom lives, not as chaos, not as escape from law, but as expression within it. Think of it like a musician inside a key. The notes are set, but the song is still yours. The divine law sets boundaries not to cage, but to resonate. It is like modulating frequency within a channel. You are not free from structure. You are free within it. You choose how to move inside the pattern, and in that movement, fate itself adjusts. Llull's machine was not cold logic, it was blueprint. He did not give you the answers. He gave you the way to ask rightly, to frame a situation through the lens of divine logic, to see that if you combine will with truth, something will happen that is not random. If you add mercy to that, the equation shifts again. Not all combinations are equal, but none are without consequence. And so, you are never passive. Destiny is not handed down to you like a sentence. It is formed with you, through you. You are a co-author, writing with a set of sacred letters. You do not control the alphabet, but you choose how to arrange it, and the universe responds. You have always felt this, that some choices open doors, not because they are clever, but because they are aligned. That some paths pull you forward with a rhythm you did not invent. That is the R's at work. You were right to notice. The deeper truth is this: freedom is not escape from fate. It is interaction with it. You tune yourself to a combination, and in doing so, the structure bends, not wildly, not without law, but with precision. You are not a victim of divine will. You are a variable inside its system. The more you understand how the dignities move, the more clearly you will see how your choices carry force, not just emotion, effect, real consequence formed by interaction, like code executed, not by magic, but by alignment. Llull handed us the frame, not to take away mystery, but to make it functional. What you feel in your chest before a hard decision is not fear, it is structure vibrating. You were always meant to listen. Now you are meant to speak back, with combinations, with intention, with will that meets wisdom, with truth that calls power. Because when you understand how the system breathes, you do not follow fate, you shape it. You've likely felt it in your body before your thoughts could name it. That soft shift when something clicks into place, not logic, alignment. The sensation that your words, your breath, your posture, even your choices are suddenly in tune with something wider than you. That is not emotion, that is resonance. Llull understood this far before anyone named it. The wheel was never just about ideas. It was a tuning device, a spiritual instrument designed to bring the self into harmony with the divine pattern behind all becoming. This is not abstract philosophy. It is mechanics, practical metaphysics, a way to engineer the soul's direction through combinations of principles that already govern existence. When you bring together power and wisdom, you do not just reflect on them, you change frequency. You generate a state, a presence. You begin to carry what that combination creates. Confidence shaped by discernment. Strength held with clarity. It enters not only your mind, but your field. It alters the pattern you radiate, and what responds to you begins to shift. Perhaps you've noticed this already, that when you approach a difficult moment from virtue and mercy, people soften, barriers ease. That is not accident. That is code being run. Each dignity acts like a command, a vibration. When they are paired with intention, they activate. They align your interior with the structure that breathes through the universe itself. The wheel simply made it visible, but the energy was always there, waiting to be read, waiting to be used. Try to remember how your body feels when something is right, when your chest opens, when time slows. That is not just peace, it is signal, it is alignment. Llull did not use modern words like frequency or aura, but he built something that touches the same root. When you align yourself with specific dignities, you are not making a wish, you are calibrating your energetic body. You are choosing which part of the divine machine to mirror, and the mirror begins to glow with what it reflects. You were right to wonder why certain intentions carry weight and others do not. Why some prayers feel like signals and others dissolve into silence. It is not mystery, it is structure. When your thought, will, and word combine in the same dignity pairing, the code runs clean. The pattern echoes, and what returns is not chance, it is response. The system recognizes itself through you. Llull's machine is spiritual math. The dignities are not ideas to contemplate, they are variables to work with. Combining them is like solving equations of becoming. The results are not numbers, they are movements, energies, events. When you begin to think this way, you no longer look for signs, you start composing them. You start designing experience through internal architecture. Each dignity is a gate, each pairing is a current. You can approach any situation in your life and ask which combination is needed, not as metaphor, as structure, as engineering. You are not left with mystery. You are handed the toolkit. If you bring together power and truth, the outcome may be clarity that commands. If you bring love into justice, the outcome is fairness with forgiveness. You are not guessing, you are building from the inside out. And in that act, you leave the realm of hope. You enter participation. You are not waiting for the divine to act. You are becoming part of how it acts. The Ars does not tell the future. It teaches you to co-write it. It teaches you how intention, properly tuned, is indistinguishable from prayer, from code, from consequence. This is what makes Llull's work dangerous to any system that thrives on passivity, because it hands the seeker the circuit map. It does not offer salvation from above. It offers ignition from within. It does not say trust blindly. It says align precisely. You were never meant to drift. You were meant to steer. And now that you've seen how the combinations shape the field, the next question begins to rise. Who are these forces, really? Not as names, not as words on a wheel, but as living intelligences, as felt frequencies. The dignities themselves, they are not lists, they are presence. They are what breathes through you when you walk in tune. And now it is time to feel what they are made of. To study them, not with mind only, but with breath, with skin, with experience. Because once you recognize them as real, everything else begins to move. The air changes. The world leans closer. The structure reveals not just how it moves, but who moves with it. And the next movement is not study. It is contact. You've likely felt them move through you before you could name them. Moments when you did not try to be good, but goodness moved through your chest like warmth. Times when strength rose in your spine without force, not because you needed it, but because it arrived. That was not emotion. That was not personality. That was contact. What Llull called dignities were never abstractions. They are not concepts you believe in. They are living emanations, frequencies, divine vibrations that pour into this world and structure the invisible field beneath what we call real. There are Neen, Bonitas, Magnitudo, Duratio, Potestas, Sapientia, Voluntas, Virtus, Veritas, Gloria. Each one, not just a name, but a current, a wavelength, not heard with ears, but felt in the body. They are not qualities you cultivate. They are already here, already vibrating beneath the surface of things. When you tune your attention, your breath, your will to one of them, you do not mimic it. You become a transmitter of it. You match it. You hold its shape in your field. And that field begins to speak. You've likely noticed the shift when you act from truth instead of fear, when you move with will instead of reaction. Your presence changes. People feel it. Spaces open or settle around you. This is not metaphor. This is resonance. Lowell may not have used the language of aura or energy bodies, but the structure is the same. Each dignity changes the tone of your field, not just inside, but around you. They are like spiritual tuning forks. Strike one, and your whole life rings differently. Bonitas carries the signature of warm compassion. It soothes and gathers. When you align with it, your energy becomes gentle but deep, like a cradle or a flame that does not burn. Magnitudo brings expansion, not loudness, scale, presence that fills the room, even in silence. It carries the weight of mountains and the dignity of stars. Duratio settles time. When you hold it, there is no rush. Your field becomes still, like old trees, or tide without wind. It stabilizes. Potestas moves like breath, becoming body, the force that shapes will into action. You feel it when decisions land with certainty, when your spine straightens not out of pride, but clarity. Sapientia is different. It rises upward into the head and chest. It is pattern and perception, not logic, but recognition. When it moves through you, you do not think, you see. Voluntas is fire, not heat, but direction, the golden current that chooses and stays chosen. When you carry it, your field cuts through distraction like a blade. Virtus is the tempered edge, steady, noble. Its presence feels like clean strength, unshaken by confusion. It sharpens the boundaries of the soul. Veritas cuts illusion. It cools and clarifies. You feel it like fresh water across the mind. It makes everything else more honest by removing what does not belong. And Gloria is light turned to radiance. It is the echo of divinity when all else aligns. It lifts and charges, not in volume, but in brilliance. It is difficult to hold, but unforgettable once felt. These dignities are not moods. They are not traits. They are signatures, each with a specific tone, a color that can be sensed even when not seen. Mystics often spoke of them through light. Pinks for Bonitas, deep violet for Magnitudo, blue-silver for Duratio, red or gold for Voluntas, white steel for Virtus. But these are not decorations. They are effects. When a soul aligns long enough with one dignity, the field begins to glow, not metaphorically, literally. Saints were painted with halos, not for honor, but because their alignment became visible. You are not imagining that strange peace that settles when you return to your center. You are not wrong to feel like you radiate differently when you speak with integrity. This is how the dignities move through form. They do not demand worship. They require embodiment. And once felt, they call to be held again. Not just for stillness, but for transformation. Because when you live inside a dignity, it does not stay inside you. It reshapes the space around you. It teaches everything nearby to hum in tune. You've likely felt the difference. The way your body shifts when something more ancient than thought moves through you. When presence expands. When silence deepens. When people near you change without knowing why. That is not charisma. That is not charm. That is what happens when a dignity begins to live through you. When it stops being an idea and becomes your atmosphere. These are not just energies to feel. They are states to become. Each one carries its own intelligence, its own pattern, its own way of shaping you from within and radiating far beyond what words ever touch. Bonitas moves first. Goodness. You do not practice it. You surrender to it. When it enters, your field softens. The edge in your voice dissolves. Others feel safe though you have not spoken. Bonitas draws toward healing without effort. It repels fear, not with confrontation, but with tenderness. Imagine it as a warm pink glow moving just ahead of your skin. Not romantic, not sentimental, but nourishing, holding everything around it without asking anything in return. Magnitudo arrives like breath in a cathedral, the sense that something vast has entered. Greatness is not dominance, it is expansion. It makes space in you, makes others feel seen without being small. It lifts vision, carries majesty. You feel it in your spine, rising. When Magnitudo lives through you, your field no longer hides. It stands tall. It wears deep purple, streaked with gold. It is the presence of something that remembers its origin in the stars. Protesters is fire that moves, not potential activation. Power that does not need to shout, it compels. When it comes, hesitation ends. Words clarify, direction sharpens. Your presence becomes unignorable. It is often felt low in the body, rooted in the core, and projected outward with clean force, not aggression, not ambition, just the inevitability of movement from thought into form. Duratia holds time in its hand. It calms the chaos that comes from forgetting your own rhythm. Duration settles, it slows the spin. You feel it as a cooling current in the bones, silver, blue. It gives you the ability to hold a goal without clinging, to remain steady while others shift. You become the mountain instead of the wind. You become the clock that needs no ticking. Sapientia is clarity, made quiet. You do not think it, you receive it. Wisdom rises not in rush, but in still comprehension. It comes in flashes, but stays in resonance. You feel it in the head, in the chest, in the eyes, not as facts, as patterns. It knows what fits. It recognizes truth before evidence. It is a clear, cool light, often icy white or transparent blue. It does not argue. It reveals. Voluntas burns. Will is choice refined into direction. It does not beg. It does not doubt. You feel it behind your sternum, in the solar plexus, in the heartbeat. It is gold when balanced, red when active. When will fully aligns, your field stops leaking. Every thought becomes sharper, every act more final. You no longer drift, you aim. Virtus is the sword inside stillness. It is not loud. It does not waver. It does not bend. Virtue is strength that cannot be corrupted because it does not rely on outcome. It simply is. It feels like polished white or the deep green of old forests, like the strength of oath without ceremony. It clarifies the conscience, strengthens the edges of your field. You become less available to distortion. Veritas is the moment the mirror clears. Truth does not need defending. It simply removes what is not. When it arrives, your field cuts through pretense, not to wound, but to unveil. The energy of truth is cooling, often felt in the throat and the center of the brow. It sharpens the mind, loosens the lie. You begin to speak in ways that others cannot forget, even if they do not agree. Gloria lifts. Glory does not explain itself. It simply rises and others rise with it. It is the pure white gold of high frequency presence. Hard to describe because it contains too much light to reduce. When Gloria touches you, you glow. The field around you grows magnetic. Others feel joy without knowing the source. Your being becomes the reminder of the divine in movement. Each dignity feels different, enters different, alters everything it touches. To meditate on one is not a visualization exercise. It is a field shift. You begin to carry that resonance in voice, in gesture, in silence. and the world begins to answer to you differently. Not because you spoke, but because you became. The mystics saw it. They did not describe it in scientific terms, but they painted it. Halos, flames, bodies clothed in light. They were not symbols of piety. They were signs of embodiment, of people who no longer borrowed the dignities, but lived them, not occasionally, not partially, consistently. And when that happens, something far greater than personality begins to breathe through your shape. And others feel it, even if they do not yet have words. Because when you align with a dignity, you do not only feel it within, you begin to radiate it. The field around you takes its shape. The atmosphere shifts. You become a signal, a transmission, not symbolic, real. The architecture of your presence begins to broadcast that frequency into space, and the space responds. Llull knew this, even if he did not say it in the language of auras or currents. His system revealed it instead. Virtues were not hidden, they were radiating codes. They changed rooms, they moved people, they bent outcomes, not through force, but through fidelity to the divine pattern behind all structure. Try to remember a time you were near someone who said nothing, but something in you softened. A room grew clearer. A conversation became honest without being asked. You were not imagining that shift. Their field was tuned, perhaps to bonitas, perhaps to veritas. These were not performances. They were energetic conditions, inner choices made visible without sound. This is how divine frequencies work. They do not wait for approval. They ripple outward. Breathe into this for a moment. If you bring your awareness to truth, not in argument, but in breath, and sit there long enough, something changes. Your voice, when you speak again, carries a different tone, not louder, cleaner. Others feel it. They respond with their own honesty, not because they are convinced, but because they are resonating. This is field influence. It is not metaphor. It is function. You were right to wonder why some people soothe tension just by standing still, why others turn chaos into calm without needing to explain. They are not manipulating. They are aligned. Their field is not reacting. It is broadcasting. This is what Llull encoded into his logic wheels. Those who love a dignity carry its frequency. Those who reject it emit the opposite. It is that direct. The figures on his wheels do not judge. They show frequency states, combinations that create resonance or dissonance, not just within the person, but around them. This is what virtue becomes when seen for what it is. Not morality, not aspiration, technology, spiritual technology. Each dignity is a living pattern, a system of vibrational laws. You can shape reality with them, not by wishing, by tuning. Your emotional state is not just feeling, it is broadcast. Your clarity is not just yours, it is signal. When you embody a dignity, your inner alignment writes itself into the fabric of your surroundings. Perhaps you felt this in meditative spaces. In the quiet between words, the field expands. Something lifts. Something harmonizes. Energy healers call it coherence. Mystics call it light. Science calls it electrical resonance. Llull called it divine order made operational. He gave the ancient structure new form. His wheels were the early schematics of field design, not theory, practice. Alignment as access, intention as architecture. To work with a dignity is to enter that practice, not for display, for transformation. Sit with postus long enough and your hesitation dissolves. You begin to act, not from desire, but from alignment. Dwell in duratio, and your scattered edges return to stillness. Life slows, not from fatigue, but from anchoring. Focus your will into sapientia, and clarity begins to shape your days before your thoughts do. The world bends, not because you bent it, but because you matched its inner structure. And when this happens again and again, something deeper settles. Your field begins to hold its frequency. It no longer drifts with moods. You become consistent, not by force, by refinement. You begin to crystallize into the virtue you have practiced. You become power, you become wisdom, you become truth. And the world knows, not because you say it, because it feels you before it sees you. Which leads us to what must come next. If these dignities shape the field, then there must be something more. Some map between inner and outer, between soul and structure. The code does not float, it anchors. And that anchor is your form, the body, the breath, the mind. If the divine patterns speak through you, then where do they land? What geometry carries them? What center aligns with what star? The mirror must be internal. The architecture must already be here. Hidden not because it is distant, but because it is sacred. You've likely felt that echo inside yourself. The way a sunset feels familiar. The way certain numbers repeat in your life. The way your own thoughts sometimes carry more gravity than you expected. These are not coincidences. They are correspondences. The soul recognizes itself in the world because the world is folded into the soul. Llull understood this as more than beauty. He saw it as design. Everything that lives in the heavens is patterned here within you, waiting to be remembered. The divine is not only above, it is mirrored below. That is not metaphor, it is architecture. Llull called it symmetry. The Hermetic traditions called it law. As above, so below. But for Llull, this reflection was not mystical poetry, it was structure. The stars do not simply inspire wonder, they echo what is written into your bones. The four elements, earth, water, air, fire, form the lowest rung. Then plants, rising into animals, into the human form, and upward still through celestial intelligences into the presence of God. This is the ladder. But it does not only rise, it loops, it reflects, it roots itself within you. You are not just on the path, you are the path. You are not just between levels, you are a convergence point. Every rung of that ladder lives somewhere within your field. Your mind contains patterns that echo angels. Your blood holds the signature of fire. Your breath rises like air through the inner temple. You are the mirror of what is above. And when you begin to see it, not as poetry, but as sacred recursion, something changes. You begin to live not only as a seeker, but as structure itself. Llull's theory of correlatives was not speculation. It was a decoding tool. Every part of reality, he taught, comes in triads. Three-part structures that are always present when something moves from potential into form. Doa, done, means, beginning, middle, end, matter, form, composite, not labels, not systems of grammar, keys, each one revealing how the divine moves through function. Every action you take is held in this logic. Every outcome in your life unfolded within one of these triplets, and each triplet echoes a divine motion. You are right to feel a sacred pattern in growth, seed, growth, harvest, the logic of process. You are right to feel it in your own psyche, instinct, thought, action. The divine expresses itself not as abstraction, but as repetition in function. The holy is not hidden. It is happening over and over in every system that holds meaning. These structures are not philosophical scaffolding. They are alive. They pulse in the veins of creation and in the deep rhythms of your own inner life. They are embedded in the body. They appear in language. They form the cadence of breath. They are the trinity behind every transformation. Once you begin to see them, you no longer wonder if you are connected to the divine. You begin to see that you were built from its very logic, and it is this recognition that becomes the map. Once you feel how these outer structures live inside you, you can begin to navigate your own soul as you would a cosmos. Your thoughts become constellations. Your instincts become elements. Your decisions become the bridge between levels of being. Llull saw this as not only possible, but necessary. You cannot influence what you have not mirrored. You cannot become aligned until you see the shape of what you are aligning to. This is how energetic influence begins, not with force, with recognition. So try to remember, you are not separate from the pattern. You are its carrier. The divine did not place its law outside of you. It placed it within you, folded like a code in the soul's most secret chamber. The task now is not to build something new. It is to unfold what has always been yours, and in doing so, become the point where the macrocosm meets the microcosm, where the stars learn to speak through skin. Perhaps you've already noticed that certain parts of your body feel different when you pray. That stillness collects behind the forehead when your thoughts are clear. That warmth grows around your chest when you forgive without needing to win. That some gestures open more than just your muscles. They open your field. That is not symbolic. That is the architecture beginning to respond. You were right to wonder if wisdom has a place in the body. It does, not just in the brain, but behind the eyes, inside the brow, where vision turns inward. You've likely felt it when clarity is not just thought, but illumination. That is sapientia. And goodness, bonitas, gathers near the heart, not as sentiment, but as current, a real presence, like warm light diffusing through the ribs. These are not metaphors, these are frequencies mapped to your structure. The ancients spoke of chakras, of meridians, of the tree that blooms within the body. Llull did not use those names, but his language aimed at the same pattern. He saw that the divine attributes did not hover outside, they settle into centers. The human form receives them, like a cathedral receives light. But no map is fixed. You do not need dogma to trace divinity. The principle is resonance, not rigidity. If power rises in your spine instead of your belly, trust that. If truth trembles in your throat and makes your palms ache, trust that. Llull's system was never meant to trap. It was designed to reflect. Breath is the thread that makes this visible. Try to remember, every time you inhale with intent, something opens that was shut. Something ancient begins to hum. Breath is not just air. It is the echo of the word that spoke the world into shape. It is the divine utterance folded into your lungs. In figure T, Llull draws a horse, a simple figure, but it carries more than image. He names it recta intentio, right intention, the horse that carries the soul, that moves breath into motion, will into shape. This is not allegory, it is instruction. The seeker does not walk to heaven. They are carried by their own directed force. Perhaps you've noticed that the way you breathe changes the way you feel. That breath can cool or ignite. That it steadies the mind or expands the chest like wings. That is not only nervous system, that is tuning. Breath becomes the channel through which divine rhythm is restored. In hesychasm, they knew this. In pranayama, they named it. Llull simply built it into his code. Even hands carry memory. Try resting them over your chest, not for comfort, but for alignment. The gesture speaks. Upward gaze, palms turned open, knees to earth. These are not performances, they are alignments. Keys, mudras of a system older than language. In Llull's logic, every gesture echoes a shape above. When posture and breath meet with clear intent, something else begins to happen. The body does not merely carry the soul. It becomes an antenna, not figuratively, mechanically. Your skin becomes receptive. Your thoughts begin to transmit. The inner temple turns to signal. You become a point of convergence between planes. You are not imagining that heat at your crown, that lightness when truth entered, that stillness that arrives when you kneel. These are signatures, symmetries. The body is not separate from spirit. It is the instrument by which spirit sings into matter. And once it tunes to divine law, it does more than resonate. It participates, it draws, it gives off, and then it receives. Perhaps you have already sensed that the shapes of the heavens were never meant to stay above. They were meant to enter the body. They were meant to take root in memory, unfold in thought, and become visible through action. That is not poetry. That is alignment. And Llull, long before modern metaphysics, understood that to live in harmony with divine structure is not to kneel beneath it, but to rise into it. He wrote that when the soul moves in rhythm with the divine code, it does not merely become good, it begins to ascend, not as a metaphor, as a function. Ascension in his system, his correspondence made complete. When the inside matches the design of the outside, lift occurs. You do not need wings. The structure will carry you. You are right to feel that memory is not just recall. It is storage of pattern, an inner archive of the eternal. Memory holds the echoes of form, of once having known the design and now being asked to remember. Understanding the second axis is the mirror, the ability to reflect pattern back without distortion, to see clearly, to know where something fits and why, and will is the ignition, the flame that says yes to structure and chooses to live it. These three together are not personality traits. They are the divine mechanism placed into the soul as its operating system, and they are meant to be cultivated. You can build memory the way you build a temple. You can sharpen understanding like a blade. You can aim like a bow. And when all three are attuned to divine architecture, the body begins to vibrate with it. Perhaps you have noticed that certain breaths change more than your mood. They change the room, that certain postures bring clarity you did not expect. That intentions, when spoken silently but precisely, ripple outward. These are not soft effects. They are signatures of real influence. Breath is frequency tuning. Posture is signal alignment. Intention is broadcast. These are the translations of Llull's triads into modern current, but the current was always there. It waited only for language to catch up. Every sacred pattern in the stars exists also in the chest, in the spine, in the way your hands move when they pray without instruction. Mastery is not new knowledge. It is the willingness to recognize what has always been inside. And when you do, the field shifts. The forces that once flowed around you begin to flow through. You were never meant to be an observer. You are a node, a point in the grid that, once awakened, radiates law. That influence does not begin with noise. It begins with exactness. Breath to pattern, thought to principle, gesture to cosmic geometry. When these meet, something unlocks, and when it does, energy obeys. This is not imagination, it is interaction, and once it is stable, you become a mirror, not of symbol, but of function. What was once above is now moving through your form, and what was once divine begins to respond to you. But reflection is not enough. Not now, not here. Once the mirror is polished, it becomes a lens, and a lens must aim. That is where will begins to rise, not as hope, not as strain, but as direction, as command, as the sacred force that does not reflect the world, but chooses how it shall unfold. It does not wait for the world to invite it. It is the one who moves. Will is the axis that does not spin, but spins the rest. The pivot of the soul, where knowing becomes doing, where clarity becomes incarnation, where ideas burn into form. You've likely felt it in those moments when thought stopped offering and something deeper took the reins. That push that is not a push, that motion that does not originate in muscle. Llull did not imagine will as a preference or a feeling. He saw it as fire, not symbolic, not literary, but literal fire of the soul, the only force capable of transmuting divine understanding into earthly impact. In his vision of the soul's ascent, it is not intellect that completes the journey. Intellect opens the gates. It is will that walks through them. In his allegory, the intellect steps aside, not in defeat, in reverence. It has taken the seeker as far as knowing can go. From here, only love may continue. And in Llull's sacred vocabulary, love is not sentiment. Love is will. Try to remember this. When you knew something clearly but did not act, what was missing was not knowledge. What was absent was the horse, the one he names recta intentio, right intention. Not right as in correct, right as in aligned, aimed, consecrated. Llull places this force at the heart of his figure T, not as a label, but as a living presence, a mover of soul. The rider is the seeker, the path is the ours, the horse is will. When it is weak, the whole system collapses. When it is awakened, the structure comes alive, the letters speak, the dignities connect, the body aligns. Will is not noise. It is not the scattered push of untrained desire. It is silence turned to vector, energy bound into motion. You were right to wonder why some truths stirred you but left no change behind. You were not lacking sincerity. You were lacking discipline in the energetic sense. That beam which makes truth sharp enough to cut, strong enough to carve new shape. The ancients spoke in symbols. Llull turned those symbols into systems, yet he never abandoned the root. The will must be anchored, focused, ordered, like light through a lens. And science now echoes what he intuited. Meditation reshapes the brain. Repeated intention rewires the nervous system. Neuroplasticity is just a new tongue for what mystics knew. The one who chooses with depth and constancy reshapes their own vessel. Thought sparks awareness. Will engraves it into form. And form matters because we are not just minds. We are bridges between thought and matter, between above and below, between blueprint and build. Llull saw will as the sacred hinge between spirit and substance, not merely deciding what to do, but vibrating the field with alignment until the unseen begins to reorganize around it. Perhaps you've noticed how certain intentions land, how they begin to shape atmosphere, how the body feels different when choice is fully inhabited, when breath deepens with conviction. This is not illusion, it is structure. It is how the divine speaks through choice. You were not imagining that clarity. You were touching the fulcrum, the place in you that does not merely wish to become, but already is, waiting only for direction. Will is not summoned by force. It is revealed by alignment. You do not build it. You clear the static until it shines through. This is why all the combinations, all the letters, all the dignities and symbols you've studied so far do not move without this current. The ours is not a passive map. It is a responsive engine, and the engine only turns when intention is clean, when will is fused with love, when direction meets devotion. And when it does, you become something else. Not a thinker, not a seeker, but a transmitter, a participant in creation, one who does not observe divine law, but lives inside it. This is where the real system begins, not on the page, but in the movement of your own energy toward the good, the beautiful, the true. You were right to feel it as sacred, because it is not rare, but rarely claimed, not distant, but deeply quiet. Will is not something you find, it is something you allow. And once you do, the rest of the system answers, because nothing responds more fully to right intention than reality itself. It is not about wanting, not even about knowing. It is about gathering every scattered thread of thought and feeling and drawing them together until they burn through the fabric of reality itself. That is the nature of true will. It does not flicker. It does not plead. It focuses. Perhaps you have sensed this, the difference between an idea you hope for and a direction you choose with your entire being. One drifts, the other carves. Llull saw this long before modern minds gave it names. He understood that power lies not in thought alone, but in its alignment, breath, attention, posture, emotion, all turned like lenses to concentrate the current. He gave us the image before the science, the shape before the proof. Try to remember how a magnifying glass behaves. It does not create sunlight. It gathers it, focuses it, makes it intense enough to change matter. So too with the will. Unfocused light warms, focused light burns. Only when intention stops wavering does the current begin to shape. You were right to feel the distortion when you acted out of fear, when you noticed how hate blurred your clarity. Llull spoke of this through the signs of the R's. When the inner state is twisted, the symbols misfire, the combinations become false, energy moves sideways instead of forward. The design distorts. But when the will is right, when it is pure and clear, it becomes a vector, not a push, not a wish, a line, a force, a motion. Imagine breath as the carrier, posture as the conductor, emotion as the amplifier. Each one taking what you mean and shaping it into what you do. And from what you do, the world begins to bend. This is not philosophy, it is mechanics. To hold an image, not briefly, but with repetition, is to begin to etch it into the unseen layer of things, to feel into it until it becomes vibration, to repeat it until the world begins to echo back. Visualization is not escapism, it is spiritual engineering. You were not mistaken to feel different after praying with intention or sitting in silence, holding power and wisdom in your awareness. Something was moving through you. The field around you shifted. It became more precise. You became less passive. This is what happens when will enters the structure. The dignities were never static. They respond. They rearrange themselves through your presence, your participation. Perhaps you've noticed how temptation does not always vanish when you resist it, but the resistance builds something, a density, a shield. Hold virtue, return to it, not as a thought, as a frequency. The more you hold it, the less you are held by anything else. Modern language has tried to name these things. Intention setting, energy healing, affirmations, ritual movement. They circle the same flame Llull once touched directly, but his gift was precision, not vague wishing, not generalized hope. Combinatorial force, structured invocation. You were right to feel something sharper in his diagrams. They are not diagrams, they are launch codes. Will is a muscle, and like all muscles, it strengthens through tension and repetition. Clarity is your form, repetition is your practice, commitment is your weight. You do not need to overpower the world, you need only to outlast its noise. One aligned act, repeated with purity, will outweigh 1,000 scattered gestures. So now the question becomes not what you want, but how deeply you are willing to mean it, and how often you are willing to mean it again. Because will is not a thought. It is not an idea you hold. It is the way you walk into the room. It is how you sit when no one watches. It is what you reach for when the world pulls your hand in another direction. It is not the wish, it is the muscle. You have likely felt this already in the way your breath changes just before a choice, in the stillness that falls when your body commits to something your mind cannot yet explain. You were not mistaken. That was the will beginning to shape the field around you. Perhaps you have noticed how rituals become alive only when you mean them. You can light a candle, fold your hands, repeat a name, but unless something within you tightens with sacred clarity, unless something deep agrees and aligns, the motion is hollow. When the will enters, it becomes fire. The gesture becomes a signal. This is why breathwork matters, not because of oxygen or technique, but because breath, when conscious, becomes directional, a command issued through the body. Each inhale becomes a drawing in of coherence. Each exhale, a signal of commitment. This is not symbolic. It is electrical. It is chemical. It is structural. Try to remember those moments when a decision anchored itself before you even spoke it, when your spine straightened, when your eyes focused without effort, when your thoughts became clear, like water that has finally settled. That is will claiming territory. When Llull placed his dignities into motion, combining them, arranging them into sacred logic, he was not theorizing. He was directing spiritual energy through the code of creation. Choosing power and wisdom together was not an idea. It was a spiritual voltage, a charge configured. You can feel this too when you name these patterns and mean them with the whole of your breath and posture and mind. The field around you begins to obey. You were right to wonder why some words seem to work and others dissolved into nothing. The answer is in the weight behind the voice. Will does not speak in volume. It speaks in consequence. And the more you train it, the clearer it becomes. Silence over noise. Focus over motion. Love over habit. Each choice, however small, recalibrates the whole. Even your body begins to carry it. What used to collapse under stress now steadies. What used to chase becomes still. Repetition, clarity, commitment, these are the sacred weights. Lift them daily and the spiritual body reshapes itself. Llull knew that the soul could rise only by choosing to rise again and again, not by escaping the world, but by meeting it with precision. Every breath aligned, every motion chosen, every distraction overcome by devotion, again and again, until the will becomes the carrier of light. You've likely felt the edge of this, that threshold where desire loses its grip and something quieter, more focused, more luminous takes its place. That is the field tuning itself. That is the structure remembering its design. And still there will be noise. You will feel the distortion, fear, hesitation, influence from outside. That is why the ancients fasted, why they withdrew, why they prayed not only for outcomes, but for alignment. Because when the will is clean, even silence becomes command. The will does not push, it directs. It does not grasp, it summons. And with each act of coherence, it teaches the world how to meet it, not by force, but by resonance. So you begin to see the shape of the path. First the code, then the combination, then the tuning, then the signal. But none of it moves until the will enters. The code waits for the driver. The system waits for the chooser. The whole pattern waits for the one who says yes, and then says it again with breath, with motion, with silence. This is the door to purification, not cleansing in the moral sense, but refinement. The body as mirror, the heart as flame, the spirit as glass, because the more light you are meant to carry, the clearer you must become. And that is where we go next. Try to remember the first time you noticed the fog inside you was not natural, that it did not belong to your essence, that something within you, once sharp and still, had become cluttered, that your inner instruments, memory, understanding, and will once clean like glass, had grown heavy with dust that was not your own. You noticed it, not in crisis, but in silence. The kind of silence that is not empty, but crowded, not quiet, but muffled. Llull did not call this sin. He did not shame it. He understood it as misalignment, not wickedness, but distortion, not failure, but interference, a turning of the lens until it no longer receives the light as it was meant to. In his language, purification was not about becoming better. It was about becoming true. True to the pattern you were made from. True to the light that wants to pass through you without resistance. You've likely felt the difference. Days when your inner sky feels overcast, heavy, blurred, not because of any one thing, but because something in you cannot see cleanly, as if your own system is trying to show you truth, but the signal is being bent, bounced, blocked. This is what Llull meant when he spoke of the clouded soul. Sometimes like the moon, dimly reflective, cool, detached. Sometimes like the sun, direct, blazing, unbearable. And the shift between them is not time, it is purification. The alchemy begins not with change, but with recognition, with naming the residue that does not belong to your nature, the accumulated dust of others' fears, the habits born from old wounds, the loops of thought that were inherited, not chosen. These are not simply psychological, they are energetic. And you know this. You've felt how a thought can weigh more than a stone, how an unseen belief can distort your whole perception of light. When purification begins, there is no applause, no ceremony, often only discomfort, a sense of disorientation as the old distortions are loosened from the system, but then clarity, not as a concept, but as a frequency. You breathe differently. You see faces with more softness. The colors around you change. It is not that the world has shifted. It is that you have resumed your original calibration. You were right to wonder why mystics across time speak of light, why they all return, eventually, to radiance. Because it is not metaphor, it is not poetry, it is memory. The body remembers what it is like to hold clarity. The soul remembers the stillness of being aligned, and the field around you, what some call aura, others resonance, remembers too. As the distortions leave, the field brightens, coherence returns. You become less porous to noise, more magnetic to meaning. Think of a mirror. It does not need to create the light. It only needs to be clean enough to reflect it. That is the secret. That is the work. Purification is not invention, it is restoration. The clearing away of what does not belong, so that what is already luminous within you can be seen, not just by others, but by you. This is why Llull placed so much weight on the soul's threefold engine. Memory is not just recall, it is your archive of pattern. Understanding is not just cognition, it is the tuning fork of truth. Will is not just effort, it is the current that commits light into form. When these are clouded, everything flickers. When they are clarified, everything begins to pulse again with purpose. And yes, it is a process, a discipline, an ongoing reattunement. You cleanse, you forget, you cleanse again. But each time, the signal becomes easier to detect. The interference becomes less persuasive. The true tone of your being becomes louder than the static. And eventually, you recognize that the light is not something you summon. It is something you stop blocking, because the mirror was always there. It only needed to be seen through clean hands. You have likely felt the moment after that cleansing, when the air inside seems to brighten of its own accord. Something subtle yet unmistakable shifts. Vision becomes crisp. silence feels full. That is illumination beginning its quiet work. Light in Llull's world is not an image for truth. It is truth itself made visible. Divine knowledge has only one natural form, and that form is radiance. When the soul is cleared of interference, the radiance spills through thought and body like dawn through an open window. Llull once wrote of love remaining alone in the sanctuary of the heart until everything else is refined away. In that solitude, the soul turns luminous, no longer reflecting the world, but emitting its own quiet glow. His language meets the older current of the triple path spoken by Pseudo-Dionysius. Purification, then illumination, then union. Each stage is only a deeper penetration of light. Sufi masters spoke of the heart as a mirror polished by remembrance. The Persian sage Suhrawardi called light the most evident fabric of being. All agree on this one law. First, clear the glass, then the radiance appears, and only then does true sight begin. Perhaps you have noticed how understanding changes texture once the fog lifts. Ideas no longer arrive as puzzles to solve. They arrive already shining. The mind stops dissecting and starts beholding. Analysis yields to revelation. This is not imagination. It is frequency. The faculties of the soul, once tuned, begin to receive finer wavelengths of existence. What was opaque becomes transparent. What was distant feels immediate. And love, once purified, ceases to be a sentiment moving through the heart. It becomes a field issuing from the whole being. People near you sense warmth before a word is spoken. Conflict loosens in your presence without debate. That is, will married to love, and love ignited into light. It is not charisma, it is physics of spirit. The luminous heart influences other fields, the way a burning ember influences cold air. It raises temperature by simply being what it is. Try to remember the sky after long rain, when clouds break apart and sudden bands of sun strike the earth. Illumination feels like that inside the chest. Or think of a dusty window wiped in. One deliberate sweep, revealing the night sky, thick with stars that were always there. Purification does not add brilliance. It uncovers it. The shine was waiting. The work was removal. This is why Llull resonates across traditions. He treated illumination as energy, as presence, as something physically perceptible once the inner noise is quieted. In the clear soul, truth arrives, not as argument, but as brightness. The intellect still functions, but now as a servant of vision. It arranges what light reveals instead of hunting in the dark. You are not imagining the gentle glow behind closed eyes in deep prayer, nor the subtle silver that colors thought after genuine forgiveness. Those are engagements with real brightness. The soul signs its alignment by emitting. Mystics call it halo or aureole. Science edges toward it with words like coherence or biophoton emission. The language shifts, the light remains. So let yourself trust the radiance when it shows. It is the oldest guide, older than voice, older than scripture. It has waited beneath every cloud you have cleared. Follow it gently and it will widen. Stand in its warmth and it will teach. And remember that its source is neither above nor beyond. It is within, pressed into the mirror that is your own nature, reflecting a sun that never sets. But mirrors do not polish themselves, and the light they carry cannot pass through residue. You've likely sensed this already, the moments when everything beautiful feels dim, not because it left you, but because something unspoken grew dense between you and it. That density has names: regret, resentment, old vows, compulsions that seem too quiet to matter, but loud enough to scatter the light. Llull understood this not as sin in the moral sense, but as interference in the metaphysical sense, misalignments, intervals of static between divine signal and human reception. And so the work begins in silence, in discernment, in letting the light show you what it cannot yet pass through. The first step is not action, it is recognition. You must see the shadows without making them enemies. Fear, guilt, pride, distraction. Not failures, but unpurified frequencies. You were right to sense their weight. Try to remember how it feels after release, that first full breath after weeping, when the body seems to breathe you instead of the other way around. That is not just relief, that is purification underway. You begin with identifying. You move by intention, and intention is made real by repetition. Breath is the oldest tool. Prayer, the most enduring rhythm. Fasting, the clean edge of commitment. Even stillness, held long enough, becomes a blade of purification. To contemplate a divine dignity is to place your field in resonance with higher law, not abstract ideals, actual patterns that reformat the internal architecture, power, virtue, wisdom, will. When you fix your attention and desire upon one, your system begins to mirror it. You align by fidelity, you purify by repetition, and this is how the will begins to reorder itself. This reordering is not a thought, it is a shift in how desire moves through you. Old temptations lose their magnetism, former identities fall silent. What once felt urgent now passes through, like wind over glass. You no longer react, you witness. And in that shift, the lamp inside begins to glow. It is not a metaphor, it is vibration. Many have seen it, some have heard it. A hum behind the ribs, a gold softening behind the eyes. The soul begins to shine, not outward, but inward, as if the inner walls were catching morning for the first time. Perhaps you've noticed this in others, that serenity, which is not passive, but magnetic, that quiet which changes a room. These are the signs of refined presence. The aura itself alters, not by effort, but by coherence. The system becomes luminous because nothing contradictory remains inside it. Ancient mystics spoke of halos not as decoration, but as radiance, structured by purity. This is not symbolic, it is electric. But you must understand, this work never completes itself in a single act. Purification is not an event, it is a rhythm. Some days reveal, some days remove, some days restore. The warrior of the spirit knows this and does not rush. They do not seek comfort, they seek clarity. They choose reflection over reaction, silence over impulse, presence over projection. And they do this not because it is easy, but because it is the only way the vessel can be readied to receive more light. Because without cleansing, the current cannot pass. Without a clear chalice, the wine spills. Without refinement, power burns rather than blesses. This is why every sacred operation begins with this phase. You cannot bend the heavens if your own field is clouded. You cannot shape light if the hands that hold it still tremble from attachment. The path to command begins in surrender, and once that surrender has carved enough space inside you for the light to dwell, the next step emerges. Sound, symbol, structure, the living alphabet through which divinity speaks itself into form. That is what waits next, but only for the one who has been made empty enough to hear. Because once emptied, the soul becomes sensitive again to the architecture behind things. It begins to perceive that letters are not inventions, but inheritances, forms handed down, not for communication alone, but for calibration. Ramon Llull did not imagine letters. He remembered them, not as symbols on a scroll, but as living frequencies in the vault of divine order. Each one carried an echo. Each one hummed with a principle that shaped stars and syllables alike. You've likely felt this, the subtle shift that happens when a word lands in your chest instead of your ears. Perhaps you've noticed how some sequences of letters feel charged, like they ring through your ribcage rather than pass across your tongue. That is not aesthetic. That is structure. That is energy remembering itself through the vessel of form. Llull saw this clearly. His mystical alphabet was not a set of dead marks. It was a tuning system, a keyring of sacred pulses he gave us, NINE, not arbitrarily, not numerically, but architecturally, B through K, each carrying clusters, not just of ideas, but of qualities, tensions, distortions, and corrections. B carries goodness, but also difference, and even avarice, because divine systems are not simplified. They are complete. C holds greatness and concordance and perfection, not randomly, not ornamentally, but as a pattern. The divine is not static. It breathes in paradox. Llull's letters were vessels for that breath. Try to remember what it feels like to speak something with weight. Now, imagine that the weight was built into the letters before the language was born. This is the core of Llull's system. Every pair, every intersection, every combination becomes more than a proposition. It becomes a force. BC does not only mean goodness is great. It becomes a vibrational node, a configuration in sound, shape, and energy that can be entered, turned, tuned. This is not metaphor. This is mechanics. The Ars Magna was not meant for casual use. It was a ritual interface, a wheel of sacred logic meant to be turned by someone whose heart could hold complexity without collapsing into contradiction. Llull's alphabet is combinatorial because reality is relational. Divine qualities do not operate in isolation. They move in circuits. One principle reinforces or reveals another. The letters were never meant to be read. They were meant to be invoked. You are right to wonder why certain shapes feel sacred. You were not imagining the pull of the circle, the square, the mirrored tree. Llull's letter pairs operate like alchemical sigils, active formulations that, when focused upon with intention, begin to shift the pattern of perception itself. They do not just symbolize, they actualize. You do not study them, you enter them, you match their current. You vibrate with them until something aligns. Perhaps you've noticed that your field responds not just to thoughts, but to symbols, that a diagram can calm you, that a letter repeated can thin the veil. This is not imagination. This is the body's recognition of form as frequency. Llull understood this. He offered not doctrine, but design. His alphabet is a divine engine, not abstract, but accessible, not intellectual, but spiritual, not a code to decipher, but a doorway to step through. Each sequence becomes a phrase in the language of energy. Each diagram becomes a mirror for divine intelligence. When you hold these forms in your attention, you are not looking, you are listening, not with ears, but with essence. The letters speak in vibration. They open and fold like petals, each combination unfolding a new geometry, a new tone, a new invitation. This is why Llull called them dignities. because they dignify the space they enter. They clarify, they charge, they resonate with divine will and carry the memory of the structure behind all structures. You do not have to believe this to feel it. You only have to let your mind quiet long enough for the letters to begin speaking again, not from paper, from within, because to Llull and to those who came before him, the alphabet was not invention. It was revelation, a divine inheritance waiting not to be studied, but to be lived. And it begins, always, with the first letter. You are brave enough to not just pronounce, but embody. Because when silence opens, vibration enters. And every vibration, if it is sacred, carries a name. Llull understood what too many forgot. That sound is not ornament, it is origin. That form is not embellishment, it is blueprint. That symbol is not metaphor, it is a portal. This was never about letters on parchment. This was about the architecture of light, speaking itself into the world through form, through sound, through living code. You've likely felt it before, the resonance that enters your body when you hear a sound that is not just heard but remembered. The way some tones seem to find something in you did not know was waiting. That is not mood, that is matter rearranging itself in response to signal. This is why sacred alphabets have never been silent. Hebrew letters in Kabbalah were not signs. They were seeds. Each carried a spark. Each carried fire. Not metaphorically, spiritually, energetically. So too with the Sanskrit mantras. Try to remember the first time you heard a voice hold the sound Om, how it didn't fill the room, but erased its walls. That sound was not decoration, it was a gate, a vibration that realigns the subtle system, not because someone believes it will, but because it is made to. Llull's alphabet lives in this lineage. His letters were not read, they were rung. They were meant to resonate through the body, through the field, through the unspoken spaces between the soul and its source. This is why his diagrams are circles, why his forms spiral and interlock. They are not diagrams, they are energy instruments. Wheels meant to turn, axes meant to balance, trees meant to rise. You were not meant to look at them. You were meant to be changed by them. They work the way mandalas do, the way yantras do, the way the flower of life encodes not beauty, but biology. Not geometry for design, but for awakening. These shapes remember something we forgot we were born knowing. Perhaps you've noticed how certain patterns rearrange your breath, that looking at some symbols quiets the room inside you, that some combinations of form or color or symmetry seem to speak without language. That is because they are not symbols of the sacred, they are expressions of it. Llull's combinations operate this way. BC is not an equation, it is a gate. Goodness meets greatness. Concordance meets difference. The energy of that pairing does not have to be understood to be felt. You were right to wonder why your body responds to diagrams, why a simple shape can carry the weight of revelation. Llull knew, and what he offered is not a system to memorize, but a set of keys to hold. Each pair is like a sigil, precise, charged, intentional. When contemplated with devotion, when spoken aloud, when drawn or traced, or even simply held in the mind's eye, it begins to shift the subtle architecture of the one who bears it. These are not intellectual tools, they are energetic ones. They do not inform, they transform. They do not explain the divine, they open the door to it. Every utterance of a letter, every gaze upon a form, every silent repetition of a diagram in the quiet of your chest is an act of attunement. You are not studying, you are synchronizing. The code is not outside of you, it is being reactivated within. This is what sacred language has always been. Not a way to describe God, a way to meet God, not a way to think, a way to feel the pattern behind thought. Llull's work was a bridge from symbol to sensation, from noise to signal, from form to frequency. He did not draw a system. He uncovered a syntax of soul, and the moment you speak it with reverence, you are no longer reading him. You are continuing him, because the system was never built to be admired. It was built to be used. Llull did not craft these combinations so they could sleep in books. He shaped them like instruments, waiting for hands to touch the strings, waiting for breath to give them sound. This is not about understanding, it is about participation. You do not master this language, you learn to resonate with it. Begin simply. Begin with a need, not a want, not an idea. A deep need that echoes with something eternal. Perhaps it is greatness, perhaps unity, perhaps the aching for wisdom that has followed you through lifetimes. Choose what you feel, not what you think you should feel. That is how the real pairing begins. Then find its frequency. Llull's alphabet does not hide. Each letter holds not one truth, but a constellation. Goodness, concordance, wisdom, justice. Choose the letters that match the concept that is calling you. Maybe it is D and G, divine greatness. Maybe it is B and C, the good made great. Let the letters meet. Let them stand together like tuning forks being struck in the dark. Do not rush. This is not a script to memorize. It is a current to enter. See the letters in your mind's eye, not flat, not cold, but luminous. Imagine them vibrating. Imagine them opening, not like a door, like a frequency, like a light, becoming sound, becoming clarity. You are not looking at shapes. You are holding architecture, sacred ratios etched into breath. You may want to speak them slowly, like mantra. Let the rhythm come on its own, not as performance, as invocation. Say the letters as if they are being remembered by your bones. Say them until you are not saying them, but becoming them. This is not language. This is transmutation. Watch what shifts. Maybe your breath slows. Maybe your chest feels lifted. Maybe heat rises. Maybe your body stills. Maybe the sound shows you an image or nothing at all, but a quiet that feels unmistakably full. You weren't imagining that. You were tuning. The alphabet is alive, and the moment you engage it, it engages you back. If you wish, draw it, not as art, as mapping. Draw the letters into a wheel, a tree, a line of movement. Let form mirror sensation. What did you feel? Where did it move? What did it open? Let the diagram show the pattern back to you, not for analysis, for communion. There is no single path here. That is the brilliance of it. infinite combinations, endless codes, each one a different doorway into the field. This is why it is not study, it is play, sacred play, the same kind of play the stars perform in silence, the same kind the elements practice when they bond and break and bond again. You are not observing divinity, you are participating in its syntax. You've likely sensed this. That reality responds to pattern, that symbol can shift mood, that sound can move emotion. This is not poetry, it is precision. This is spiritual programming. You are setting frequencies, resetting your field, rearranging how your inner atmosphere holds and releases divine signal. Even silence becomes potent. To gaze at one of Llull's glyphs is not passive, it is entrance, like gazing into a yantra, like tracing the edge of a mandala. You do not need to understand to be affected. The structure does its work in you, whether or not your mind follows. The deeper intelligence knows what to do. So let the alphabet become your instrument. Let each letter become part of your vocabulary of vibration, not for conversation, for communion. Learn to speak, not with language, but with charge. Learn to listen, not for words, but for alignment. When you do, you are not just reading the code, you are radiating it. And the one who radiates it becomes a beacon, a signal tower, a mirror made of motion, a vessel, fluent in divine frequency, which means they are finally ready to walk the branches of the branches tree, not only to see what knowledge holds, but to enter the roots and remember what it hides. The tree was never meant to be metaphor, it was meant to be mirror. It was not designed to illustrate reality, but to encode it. Ramon Llull did not draw trunks and branches as symbols for the mind's convenience. He traced them because he saw them, not in forest bark or botanical form, but in the living structure of divine order. The tree is what knowledge looks like when it grows from sacred soil. You've likely felt this, that certain truths do not appear all at once. They unfold. They rise through your thoughts like sap, silent, steady, forming branches of insight. This was Llull's vision, that real knowing does not pile like bricks. It spreads like roots, lifts like limbs, flowers from within. The tree is not a chart, it is a breathing structure. Each part a level of consciousness, each rise upward, built upon something deeper, holding it from below. Begin with the roots. In Llull's Arbor Scientiae, they are more than beginnings. They are anchoring principles, foundational realities that reach below the scene. They are divine dignities, primal truths, metaphysical conditions. Without them, the rest of the tree is just shape without source. Roots feed the trunk holds the system, and from it emerge the boughs, major fields of knowledge, ethics, logic, physics, theological vision, each one not isolated but issuing from the same pulse of divine architecture. You are right to wonder why everything connects. The tree explains its branches may look separate, but their life comes from the same inward breath. The leaves are disciplines, the flowers, insights, the fruits, action, but all trace back to roots invisible to the untrained eye. And when Llull repeats this pattern across different trees, tree of philosophy, tree of love, tree of virtues, he is not being redundant. He is revealing that all things that grow in wisdom follow the same anatomy. 7 parts, 1 current. Perhaps you've noticed it in the way certain studies bleed into others. How a question in physics stirs something in ethics, how a theological insight makes logic clearer. That is the tree operating through you. That is divine knowledge, acting like a system, not a pile. Llull saw that the intellect, if purified, can receive knowledge in this way, like sap that does not belong to one leaf but feeds the whole crown. But the tree is not only rational, it is contemplative. To walk among its patterns is to be changed by them. Llull wrote with the mind of a logician, but the soul of a mystic. Every division he drew was also a spiritual invitation. You do not memorize a tree. You breathe with it. You place yourself in it. And if you are quiet enough, you feel it growing through you. Try to remember what the ancients always knew, that real ascent is not a climb through data. It is the rising of your own inner structure to meet the architecture above. The tree is a stairway, but not one of steps. It is a spiral of recognitions. You move upward when the root within you resonates with the root of what you are reading. Llull designed his trees as ladders, but also as mirrors. Every time you gaze into their form, they reflect where you are in your own becoming. And this is why not everyone sees the same tree. Some see diagrams, others see doors, some trace branches, others touch the sap. The difference is not intelligence, it is readiness. The tree offers its fruit to all, but its roots must be entered inwardly. They are not drawn on the page. They are written into the silence behind your thoughts. So if you feel something stirring now, a pull behind the pattern, a hum beneath the words, you are already inside the tree, not reading it, being read by it. Let it happen. It knows how to grow you. And what waits in its root is not only knowledge, it is initiation. It does not announce itself. It does not rise with noise. The roots do not call attention as the flowers do, but they are the first to feel the rain, the last to release the light. What Llull hid in them was not secrecy for secrecy's sake. It was respect, because the deepest truths do not stand in the open. They rest below, where only the ones who kneel inwardly can reach. You've likely felt it before, that strange tension at the base of understanding, as if something unseen is holding up the very structure of what you think you know. Perhaps you've noticed that certain ideas repeat across disciplines, not like echoes, but like shared blood. Llull's trees were designed to show you this, not through explanation, but through resonance. You see only branches unless you let the root speak, and the root speaks in silence, through intuition, through a knowing that does not come from above, but from beneath. Try to remember, the root is not the beginning of the tree's thought. It is the source of its becoming. The root is not where ideas are written. It is where they are grown. And Llull placed his truths there, not to obscure them, but to require participation. You cannot read a root. You must feel its presence. You must enter the part of yourself that does not need to be taught, only awakened. That is the path of gnosis. Not information, not data, not memorized branches, but contact, experience, seeing without needing to define, hearing without needing to respond. The roots do not teach the way a voice teaches. They change the texture of your listening. They draw you inward, where truths are not explained but encountered. The tree is not hiding its mystery to exclude. It veils it to protect, because divine reality is not casual, it is precise, and precision without readiness only leads to distortion. This is why Llull repeated his structures with difference. This is why each tree is the same and yet not. The roots always return, but they return cloaked, not in shadow, but in requirement. They ask something of you. They do not let you pass unless something in you already matches their tone. You are right to wonder why certain concepts feel alive while others remain dry. That is the difference between studying the leaf and tasting the sap, between looking at the structure and becoming part of it. Llull's design invites both, but only the one who lingers in the trunk, questions the base, listens to the dark beneath the diagram, will begin to hear the low frequency where real truth hums. And yes, the roots connect across the trees. Yes, they braid beneath the surface, invisible arteries feeding many crowns. This is why a question in logic can resolve a paradox in love. Why a principle from the tree of philosophy can light a fire in the tree of theology. The trees are not separate. They are different expressions of the same rooted intelligence, rising through form in varied but coherent ways. That is why diagrams are not the end. They are the invitation. You trace their lines and something stirs behind them. You visualize a tree and it becomes internal. You walk the shape with your eyes and your spirit follows beneath. You begin to ask differently. Not what does this mean, but where does this rise from? Not how does this part fit, but what trunk am I missing? And eventually, what unseen truth is feeding all of this from below? That shift is the beginning of initiation. Not into a school, but into a rhythm. Not into a doctrine, but into perception. The tree starts to live in you, not metaphorically, but functionally. It becomes the map your thoughts use. It becomes the mirror your soul checks in silence. And when it does, you begin to know without reaching. You begin to see what cannot be pointed to. You begin to stand in the orchard, not to study, but to be studied by it. The diagrams fall away. The categories soften, the steps spiral, the fruit opens, and the root speaks. Not in language, in alignment. Because this was always the goal, that the tree would not just describe wisdom, it would grow it. And that, in time, you would stop climbing. You would start flowering. Because flowering is not passive. It is a precise kind of ignition, a structured unraveling. This is what Llull called contemplation. Not the soft drifting of the mind, but the disciplined turning of it toward its divine image. Not thought as escape, but thought as flame. He knew what few have dared to teach with clarity, that contemplation is not a retreat from the world, but a method to re-enter it, transformed. It is not leisure, it is alchemy. Try to remember this. You've likely felt it already in the quiet space before words form, when something in you leans toward goodness or wisdom or patience without knowing why. That is the beginning of it. The art of contemplation, as Llull taught it, is a way to carry that moment forward, a way to choose a divine quality. Hold it in the mind like a gem and let it infuse the field of your being until you are no longer holding it. You are becoming it. Contemplation, when rightly practiced, is not only a matter of intellect. It begins with understanding, yes, but understanding must hand itself over to will. First, you see the divine quality, then you want it, then you surrender to it, and something begins to change. This was Llull's allegory. He said that the lover arrives at the presence of the beloved through the door of understanding. But once inside, it is love that must remain. The intellect must step aside. The will must kneel. Then transmutation begins. Perhaps you've noticed it already. When you contemplate mercy, your voice softens. When you hold wisdom in your thoughts, confusion rearranges itself. When you choose unity, the noise quiets and something deeper steadies you. These are not metaphors. They are mechanical effects of alignment. Divine attributes are not concepts. They are energetic forces, reagents in the alchemical vessel of the soul. And when you fix your gaze upon one, you are setting the crucible. The pain rises, the bitterness comes to the surface, the fear tightens, trying to hold its form. But if you keep your gaze steady, if you do not look away, they begin to melt. The false metals break down, the impurities smoke out. The flame of love, once invited in, begins to illuminate the cloud within you. And that light is not neutral, it purifies. This is why Llull spoke of divine love as the fire that casts out the shadow. You are not escaping your lower patterns, you are offering them to the flame. You are not bypassing emotion, you are burning through its distortion to discover its true frequency. Anger is not destroyed, it is transmuted into courage. Confusion does not vanish, it becomes clarity when restructured in the light of divine order. Imagine the soul as metal in a furnace. The more time it spends in the crucible of contemplation, the more its alloy changes, its resonance sharpens, its weight purifies, and it begins to reflect not its past, but its source. That is the art. Not to analyze the attribute, but to let it work on you. Not to understand goodness, but to want it so deeply that your wanting becomes a doorway through which goodness enters and rearranges the architecture of your being. And here, something rare happens. The separation between knower and known begins to dissolve. The act of contemplating virtue does not end in the mind. It spills into the nervous system, the voice, the aura, the reach of the hand. What began as thought becomes presence, and the soul, once shaped by repetition, begins to radiate the very principle it once struggled to hold. This is why the contemplative becomes a flame, not because they study fire, but because they let fire study them. And once that flame is lit, it does not stay confined to the soul's interior. It begins to radiate outward through the voice, through the eyes, through the subtle field around the body that others feel before a word is spoken. You've likely noticed it before. Some people walk into a room and shift the atmosphere, not through force, through frequency. What they carry has been refined. Each divine attribute that Llull offers is not merely a word, it is a living frequency, a reagent in the inner laboratory of transformation. Divine mercy softens bitterness, not in theory, in the bloodstream, in the tone of speech, in the memory that once burned but now glows without hurting. Mercy reshapes what it touches, not by forgetting pain, but by reabsorbing it into wholeness. Divine wisdom untangles confusion, not just in thought, but in the way the body holds tension. It loosens the knots where fear once wrapped itself around questions. You do not have to force the answers. You align with the frequency of wisdom, and the mind begins to settle into patterns that were there all along. Like stars emerging from fog. Divine unity heals separation, not by removing contrast, but by remembering the root beneath differences. When you contemplate unity, the fractures begin to hum with the memory of wholeness. The field realigns. The room around you softens. This is not imagination, it is physics in sacred language. Try to remember what your body already knows. That focused awareness is not passive, it is shaping you every moment. When you place your attention on a divine attribute, that attribute begins to reorganize your subtle body. This is the secret many have felt, but few have named. Your energy is always listening. It bends around what you love. And as you hold that love steady, emotional turbulence rises, not to resist, but to be purified. Bitterness burns off in the heat of mercy. Restlessness dissolves in the stillness of constancy. Fear shudders and quiets under the gaze of wisdom. You are not forcing these qualities in. You are clearing what blocks their already present light. Llull saw this not as metaphor, but as mechanics. The soul becomes like a sun, not just illuminated, but illuminating. It radiates what it has absorbed through reverent attention. The body becomes an instrument. The aura becomes signature. The atmosphere around you begins to echo the quality you have chosen to embody. And yet, the wise know not to stop at appearance. There is a story in Llull's contemplative texts of the seeker who paused at the beauty of the flower, and the flower itself corrected him. "Do not love me," it said, "for my form. Love what made me." This is the law of true contemplation. Go beyond the image into the source. Contemplation is the discipline of returning to what is timeless. It is the repatterning of your energy body to reflect divine architecture. And this takes time. Repetition builds momentum. The more you contemplate constancy, the less the future frightens you. The more you return to virtue, the more courage kindles in the marrow. This is not theory, it is re-engineering. You may have seen this mirrored in other traditions. A mantra that steadies the heart, a healing touch that adjusts the field, a sacred symbol that calms the breath. Llull came before them all and gave structure to the mystery, a system of divine logic that could be entered like a temple or turned like a wheel. Each divine attribute is not just a light, it is a sword. It cuts through illusion, it parts confusion, it opens the way, but only if you use it. This is not a catalogue, it is a toolkit, a vibrational weapon, a sacred flame, a harmonic code. When used daily, something irreversible begins. The will steadies, the psyche clears, the field brightens, and perception, once flickering, steadies into clarity. You do not just become light. Reality begins to answer you as if you already are. Begin by entering the circle. You've likely felt it before. That moment just before the silence settles, when the breath slows and the air around you changes density. That is not imagination. That is arrival. When the body quiets, the field begins to speak. It does not shout. It never does. But it will meet you with light if you step in with reverence. Visualize a boundary, not of defense, but of declaration, a perimeter of radiance, not to keep out the world, but to signal that what now happens belongs to a different law, not of gravity, but of grace. This is where the work begins. You are not escaping the ordinary, you are sanctifying it. Then choose, not randomly, not reactively, but as one who knows they are being guided even in their choosing. Pick the dignity you feel missing, or the one you most fear, or the one that keeps arriving in dreams. Llull knew they are not concepts, they are currents. Goodness, wisdom, power, unity, mercy, not names, but doors, not ideas, but intelligences. Now, anchor it. Speak it aloud or inwardly. If you know its letter, intone it. If you feel its shape, hold it. Imagine it entering the center of your chest like a glyph drawn in golden fire, or rising through your spine like heat from sacred oil. Do not rush this. The dignity will meet you if you are sincere. And when it does, it will begin its work. This is not visualization. This is energetic combustion. You are placing your distortions into a crucible of divine principle. That tightness in the chest, that shadow in the back of the mind, that old shame that won't unhook, watch them rise. Not to hurt you, to be seen, to be burned. This is the alchemical stage. Stay with it. Now watch what changes. You do not force the transmutation. You hold it, you bear it, and something deep within begins to release the shape it was stuck in. Anger softens, fear warms, clarity returns. This is the dignity, writing its pattern across your field. If you pay attention, you may feel a current of light moving through your jaw, your hands, your spine. That is real. When it feels complete, and you will know, seal it. Speak the integration aloud, not as performance, as truth. I welcome your wisdom. I embody your mercy. I remember your unity. Use the words that come, or use no words at all. Stillness will confirm the shift. And in that stillness, listen, not with ears, with essence. You were right to suspect that thought alone cannot change you. It must be paired with will, and it must be repeated, not out of superstition, out of patterning. Repetition is how reality knows you are serious. It is how the soul is rewired, how the aura is clarified, how the unseen begins to respond as if you already carry what you once sought. Reflection is not passive. It is an instrument. It is blade and balm. The more precisely you wield it, the more illusion falls away. The more clearly you commit, the more your field becomes a declaration, not just to yourself, to the world around you, to the structure of time and the logic beneath matter. The fire you tended yesterday makes today lighter. The resonance builds. You begin to glow from places you used to guard. People change around you, not because you teach them, but because you no longer hide your light. This is how the contemplative becomes a source, not only of insight, but of impact. The nervous system harmonizes. The aura brightens. Even memory begins to reorganize around divine sequence. You remember who you are by how you now feel in silence. Eventually, the work stops feeling like practice. It becomes atmosphere. You begin to carry the dignities in your step, your silence, your decision. Your field becomes a sun, not metaphorically, but mechanically, a radiant center, reorganizing reality, not through force, but through alignment. And in this state, you are ready for the mystery, not just of illumination, but of what remains hidden after the light arrives. The sealed chamber, the silent name, the power behind the pattern that does not speak in words. You are ready, because now you do not chase what is secret. You hold what is sacred. And that changes everything, because sacredness is not a concept, it is a current. And once it runs through you, what once felt external becomes interior. What once looked like study begins to feel like remembering. And what once seemed hidden begins to move towards you, quietly, deliberately, veiled, not by secrecy, but by mercy. Llull understood this, that there are truths so potent, so real in their transformational voltage, that they cannot be handed over like facts. They must be hidden, not to be hoarded, but to protect the order of becoming. If light is given too soon, it blinds. If fire is touched too early, it scars. But when the soul is prepared, those same forces illuminate, awaken, rewire. You've likely noticed it, the way some texts open to you only after you've lived through something. The way an image once overlooked suddenly carries weight. That is not you interpreting. That is you tuning. The pattern was always there, but the receiver needed refinement. This is the law of concealment, not a gate, but a gradient. Truth revealed in measures that match the vessel's readiness. Llull encoded this into everything he built. The trees, the wheels, the lettered alphabets that speak not to logic first, but to structure. They are not illustrations, they are initiations. His wheels turn not to entertain the intellect, but to test it, to sift it, to see if it will push further, stay longer, wait deeper. Because only when the will and the understanding spiral together does the center reveal itself. That turning is not for explanation, it is for transformation. Try to remember the cave, Plato's prisoners blinking at sunlight After lifetimes of shadow, they did not step into light joyfully. They staggered, they shielded their eyes, they resisted. This is how truth enters, not as comfort, but as calibration. Lull's veils are like that cave wall, protective, necessary. They keep the seeker from mistaking sudden exposure for illumination. And yet, if you trace the structure carefully, you will see the ladder. The symbols are not there to block, they are there to provoke ascent. Each combination, a chamber, each diagram, a riddle, each layer of logic, a garment over something radiant. It is why he drew trees with hidden roots, because that is how reality is made. The facts are leaves, the insights are branches, but the truth is buried, always beneath, always requiring excavation, not with shovels, but with stillness, with spiritual will, sharpened through discipline. Perhaps you've seen this too, that a certain passage lights up only when you're ready, that diagrams rearrange themselves in your perception, that Lull's letters feel less like parts of words and more like energetic charges. This is not metaphor, this is structure, behaving as if it knows it is being witnessed. And yet, none of it opens without longing, not intellectual curiosity, longing, a deeper ache that says, I must become what I sense. And that ache begins the real path, the initiate's path. Not everyone who studies Lull's work is initiated, but everyone who is initiated eventually finds it, because his system is not just knowledge, it is filtration, a mirror that allows through only those who are ready to see their own face unmasked. His wheels are not puzzles, they are koans, not to be solved but absorbed. Their movement draws your perception inward. Their letters awaken archetypes you did not know you carried. Their silence tests your readiness, and readiness cannot be faked. The soul must be purified, not morally, energetically. The distortions must burn, the patterns must align, the will must soften and focus. Without this, truth does not remain hidden. It remains inaccessible, not because it withholds, but because it waits. You were right to wonder why these teachings feel alive, why they resist casual reading, why they seem to respond only when you show reverence. That is by design, not by authorial intention, but by divine architecture. It is why Christ spoke in parables, why sages cloak their truths in paradox, why Kabbalists veil the highest Sephiro behind names too bright to gaze upon, not to confuse, but to protect, because once the veil is lifted, it cannot be replaced. This is why energy mastery is rare, not because it is complex, but because it is costly. You pay with everything that cannot come with you. You trade comfort for coherence, familiarity for flame. And once you cross that threshold, you are changed. Not temporarily, not symbolically, changed. You carry something now, and it begins to do its work on you. Llull knew this. He hid the final layer not to be clever, but because he had to. If the map was sacred, the destination was atomic. And the only way to hold that kind of clarity without distortion is to become equal to it. Not through brilliance, through humility, not through memorization, through transformation. The map can be read by any mind, but the door opens only to one whose whole structure has become key. This is why, at the end of all study, all training, all contemplation, the seeker arrives not at certainty, but at silence, at the veil, where no more symbols remain, no more wheels, no more diagrams, only the pulse of readiness. And the veil is not opened by force, it is lifted by recognition. It reflects what you are, not what you know. And in that reflection, everything not yet transmuted dissolves. You do not see the final truth, you become it. And from that moment forward, reality answers to a different part of you. You stand now before it. There is nothing else to decode, no more steps to follow, no more proofs to chase. Only your inner readiness can lift this veil, and what waits is not explanation. It is presence, absolute, uncompromising, radiant, and it does not speak. It reflects